Centaurworld is the definition of a crazy, colorful, good vibes show. But for everyone who makes it to the end of Season 1 and into Season 2, it becomes plain to see that the singing and laughing is just the surface, the tip of the iceberg. Concealed beneath a silly facade, Centaurworld is actually a show with true value and emotional depth. In this video, we will discover everything Centaurworld truly has to offer, as we are analyzing the different levels of the Centaurworld Iceberg. On the first level, we've got some information concerning the outside of the show you can actually find yourself through a short Google search. So let's make this quick. The core cast is quite prominent. Main character Horse is voiced by Kimiko Glenn, also known for her role as Brooke Soso from Orange is the New Black. You probably also know Pavesh Chinas or Zulius's voice being the same as Tibbles from the Owl House. Derpleton borrows the voice of Josh Radnor, mostly recognized as How I Met Your Mother's Ted Mosby. And the most pleasant one, Glendale, is voiced by her own and the show's creator, Megan Nicole Dong. Not only do they lend their speaking voices to the characters though, whenever the characters are singing, their voice actors are really the ones singing those songs. What is not a given even for musical shows. In this case, however, it only makes sense, as most of the core cast have appeared on Broadway at least once, or have studied fields related to music. Descending to level 2, we are entering the realm of facts that aren't literally spelled out in the show, but are openly dealt with, and easy to summarize when one has seen the entire show. That one scene where Elk is slowly turning into the Nowhere King mirrors his state of mind. As his soul is further corrupted by the day, his physical body is gradually decaying in accordance. At the beginning of the show, each member of the herd was battling a type of trauma or mental issue. Maybe battling is the wrong term. Rather, they displayed perfect examples of how not to deal with their respective problems and of how to deal with them. By the end of the show, they have all gradually learned to keep their issues in check and have let go of all behavior that previously strengthened their insecurities. Wormwing, for example, a war survivor, was traumatized by seeing her home being destroyed, losing everyone and everything dear to her in an instant. Since as a child she could not comprehend why this was happening, her brain came to the conclusion that the world is just dangerous and everything on it wants to kill you. Just how I feel when I'm forced into a room crowded with people. Thus, when she finally found people she cares about again, her reaction was to create a safe space for them. Admirable intention that unfortunately meant they were all isolated and confined to that space. While she was trying to protect everyone, she robbed them of their freedom. With Horse's help, she learned that sometimes you have to get out of your comfort zone, and that the world itself is not evil. Over the course of their journey, Wormwing makes so many new experiences, good and bad ones, understanding how to distinguish them, so that in the end, she is one of the most open and welcoming characters. Derpleton was a victim of parental abuse. His parents despised him for being different from them, only wanting to enjoy himself, while they were the personifications of snootiness. Because of them, he came to hate, or at least be ashamed of, the things they disliked about him. Most notably, his constant farting. The lesson he learns is accepting himself the way he is and being proud of his uniqueness, in addition to the fact that no one, not even your parents, have the right to stand between you and what makes you happy. What's most lovely about Derpleton's case is that in Season 2, he is always giving his utmost in being a good father to his adopted son Stapleton, passing everything he's learned on to him. Chad had a similar problem with self-love. After being denied becoming a tulip stepper, what had been his dream for as long as he can remember, he got the feeling he would just never be enough. He's not as tall, not as strong, and not as aesthetic as the horse. Trying to make the pain go away, he developed the habit of looking down on those he's actually jealous of, like Horse and the Horse. The constant bad-mouthing of what makes others great to push his own ego is clearly a defense mechanism keeping him from facing his own faults. Towards the end of the series, he can finally admit his true feelings. In doing so, he can find new motivation to pursue his dream in spite of the disadvantages, aiming to show the whole world that he can exceed everyone's expectations and do even better than those who did not take him for full. Zulius, on the other hand, has the opposite problem. In his eyes, he's perfect, the fairest of all. He's somewhat narcissistic and feels threatened whenever someone appears to come close to his own greatness. His immediate reaction is to hate the people he views as competition. Sounds like the average toxic Twitter user, to be honest. Later on, his issue is seemingly resolved when he enters a romantic relationship with Splendid, his greatest and fiercest competitor. Instead of hating Splendid, he is now able to appreciate beauty in general, beauty that is not him. Well, Glendale's case is rather obvious, to be honest. Apart from the kleptomania, Glendale is repeatedly shown to be paralyzed with anxiety. Her development should probably be part of the first iceberg level. It's just here for organizational reasons. Glendale did a whole presentation on how anxiety is a combination of fear and fantasy, and that realization alone can help forgetting some of that fear, because one instinctively tries filtering out the fantasy parts upon learning that you're really just making things up. And in fact, as the show's progressing, the number of anxiety attacks is decreasing, even as she takes part in increasingly, potentially anxiety-inducing activities. Horse has her issues too, but those definitely belong to the deeper levels, so stick around until we get there. In contrast to these positive developments, there's the general, who's been rotten from beginning to end. Yes, from the beginning. In case you don't remember, originally Ryder received his order to secure the artifact, the only thing that could finally bring the war with the Minotaurs to an end. As soon as his true colors were revealed, his past words were to be met with caution. Was his goal ever to end the war? Wasn't the whole point of his backstory that all he, the Elk and the Elktaur, ever cared about was the woman? In other words, obtaining the artifact never would have or could have ended the war. The general lied to everyone, given he wanted the key piece for himself, hoping to leave the war behind on Earth while he can join the love of his life in Centaurworld. This would have been especially convenient since he would not even have needed to open the rift and face the Nowhere King. Interestingly, this behavior is the same as the Elktaurs, using magic to get close to the woman instead of confronting the real problem. While we are already talking about humans, none of the human characters has ever received a name. They are only known and called by their roles. Ryder, for example, is called Ryder because before Horse could talk and stuff, names meant nothing to her. The person who rode on her back was her rider, and that's that. But why does the general not have a name? Or the woman? Gary the human skeleton got a name, but two of the most important characters did not? Obviously, there's more to this. Names and superficial features like a nice smile can be misleading. The title of general sounds grand and noble, when we all know that in reality he's a rotten piece of shit. Had his name been Tom or Satan, the audience might not have been quite as surprised when he turned out to be evil. The direct contrast between the title with a nice reputation and its bearer being an asshole clearly shows that a name or title carries no significance whatsoever. Likewise, Ryder is quite the objective term for someone who means so indescribably much to Horse, who gave her the almost loveless name. And while this observation is easily made from the fact that the humans do not have names, the same does apply to the centaurs too. Horse is just called Horse, and the other centaurs all have names that are entirely made up and do not allow any prejudices, supporting the idea that names do not define people. Two exceptions from this are Chad and Doug. Chad has a regular name because his name is a nod to him actually being a Chad. Doug does have a name bound to expectations, given it is a real real name, but simultaneously, his case again supports the before-mentioned notion. Initially, his full name was Uncomfortable Doug. Later on, he decided on his own that henceforth he shall be called Comfortable Doug. After he has become the person he aspired to be, he felt comfortable and changed his name to express that. Although technically his name does describe his person, it is not the name that defines him. Quite the opposite. His personality influenced his name. What means that a name does not have any power over its bearer. Centaurworld is a show that picks up real, serious societal issues, despite being appropriate for audiences of all ages, like the expectations and prejudices we just mentioned. Or racism. Back when the worlds were still connected, some of the humans were straight up racist towards the centaurs, like this old wanker right here. There is no reason to hate the centaurs that are physically superior, can use magic, and have built a functioning society that is more peaceful than the world of humans has ever been. Humans simply don't like the centaurs because they are different. Because they are only partly human, the supposed pinnacle of evolution. Beings that are half beasts could never reach the greatness of humans. Yuck. This is one of the influences that led to the Elktaur splitting himself up, by the way. Since human society made him feel like he needed to be human in order to be with a woman and to be a whole existence. Well, since that didn't work out, he resorted to other methods. The Nowhere King himself stated he created the Minotaurs out of the desire to have his own family. This statement makes it seem like the emphasis lies on the creating part though. He can't find a family, so he makes his own. But its hidden meaning is that he had reached a point where he really did not belong to any world anymore. He was neither human or a real elk, nor was he a centaur. In order to obtain his own family, even one that he created, he needed to forge an entire new species. A species that resembled him in the way that they were ambiguous beings, not belonging anywhere. Solely such beings could become his family, because only they would want to become his family. Only they understand the struggle, and just like him, are in search of a place where they fit in. By the way, this feeling is reflected by the title of Nowhere King and the rift being called the Nowhere too, simply because he belongs nowhere. To get back to the racism stuff we've discussed earlier, the Nowhere King certainly was bothered by it. So while he could not become human to escape the discrimination and the disadvantages of being a centaur wanting to live in human society, by producing a mix between humans and centaurs, he began erasing the differences between the two species. That is perfectly in accordance with the war he's been waging on the other species as well. He intended to erase all life until nothing but himself and the Minotaurs were left. With everyone then being the same, the problem he faced in his earlier life would no longer exist. Okay, so the Nowhere King tried eliminating everything that made him different from the rest of the world. But the next iceberg level is all about opposites and contrasts. In the Nowhere King's or the Elktaur's case, his self-hatred that drove so many of his actions throughout the show eventually caused the opposite of what he wanted to achieve over and over again. In the beginning, he was a rift worker, strikingly passionate about his work, always motivated to put in the hours to keep the worlds united for all time. Then, his self-loathing led him to split himself up, what ultimately turned out to be the originator of the worlds being separated by the woman. Generally, he kept doing the exact opposite of what the woman wanted him to. Men. She wanted the Elktaur. She wanted him to stay the way he was. He took the Elktaur from her. He changed and continued changing in an unlikable direction up to his very end. She literally warned him back when he was still the Elktaur to respect the balance of the worlds. He did not respect the world's balance that resided inside of him, thereby throwing the physical worlds out of balance too. Last but not least, the fact that he hated his centaur self so much at last prevented him from growing old with the person he loved, his first and most essential goal. And you know what's most ironic? Elktaur believed he consisted of two halves that he could separate from from each other, and by physically disjointing them, seemingly proving one can just detach oneself from the parts one does not like. Yet, his story emerged as the perfect example that life does not work that way. The point is, people have several sides to them. You don't always act the same way all day every day. Sometimes it even feels like what you just said came out of someone else's mouth, but it's all you. The elk and the general were just two parts of the whole thing. That doesn't mean the Nowhere King made mistakes and committed crimes, and the general was a traitor and liar, while the elk-taur did nothing of the likes because he wasn't around. No, the elk-taur was all of this, especially because his parts were reunited in the end. Just because the free parts disappeared, the consequences of their actions don't. The elk-taur carries full responsibility. There are more symbols supporting that idea. Firstly, the parts cannot live while the other dies. Obvious. Secondly, the elk that originally seemed like the nicer half between him and the general became the ultimate evil. And the general that was a huge jerk from the start was long regarded as a hero, while the elk descended into darkness before he too revealed his true nature. Despite being physically separated, their characters went through a similar development. In other words, no matter how nice, serene, and intelligent the elk-taur might have come across over the few minutes we actually saw him, his true nature is twisted. He, and he alone, is all the evil that befell the world. Great, now that we've talked a lot about the elk-taur, on the next level we can talk about his two parts, the relationship between the elk and the general. Unambiguously, plain for the audience to see, the elk was jealous of the life the general was leading. His state of mind is graver and more abysmal than mere jealousy though. While the general is living the life the elk-taur, thus the elk too, always dreamt of living, the elk could only stand there and watch. What makes this situation so disgusting is that since the general and the elk are the exact same person with indistinguishable desires, the elk is witnessing literally everything being taken from him. There is not a single hope he ever had that he could still fulfill, because the general has already done all of it. From the elk's POV, the general is everything the elk strive to be and could have been. In his opinion, should have been. Why is the general's life perfect and his a nightmare? Why is the elk's consciousness not inside of the general's body? When the elk-taur split, there must have been an equal chance of becoming the elk or the human for the two parts of the elk-taur's consciousness. It's only logical the elk is watching the general, only being able to think that he himself deserves what the general has. Interestingly, the general has the same point of view, just with a positive twist. Undoubtedly, he deservedly gets the woman and everything he asks for. He's the elk-taur's superior half. He's the manifestation of the elk-taur's ideal version of himself. The elk, in contrast, is everything the elk-taur despised about himself. Beastly, abnormal, no confidence, a loser, a real freak. How can the general not also detest this pathetic being? Frankly, the world and he himself would be better off if the elk did not exist, he thinks to himself. The elk-taur had finally managed to remove the tainted part on the glorious human living trapped inside the centaur shell, and yet the beast was still trying to hold them back, going as far as suggesting reversing the split. The elk had to go, or the general could never live in peace. Terrifying how the elk-taur did not only split himself up, he was willing to non-figuratively kill a part of himself. Though we already established earlier that this does not work the way he thought it did, and that what the general despised about the elk also defines the general. People can neither kill nor separate parts of themselves. Them's the rules on every level of one's personality. Therefore, it makes perfect sense that the elk is still hidden deep inside of the Nowhere King, despite the Nowhere King being entirely in control of their body and his actions. Concurrently, the elk's initial persona being forced to watch the Nowhere King's crimes from the inside shows how he was at all times aware what was happening to him. And most most likely also that everything he was doing was evil. He was not in a position to stop the process, however, given that the negative emotions that drove him towards this behavior were too strong to oppose them. Simultaneously, he might not have even wanted to stop at the time, especially since he could not precisely foresee just how terrible the consequences would be. I guess this applies to real life somehow. Sometimes people notice that they are changing, and how, but they cannot or cannot bring themselves to do anything about it, being forced to watch how they are becoming estranged from themselves. Kind of like those scenes in movies, when the main character looks into the mirror and asks themselves what has become of them. We've now reached the iceberg's bottom level, containing topics most people do not notice themselves, or at least only after intense pondering and one or more rewatches. In almost every story, there is a hero and a villain. In Centaurworld's case, those are Horse and the Elktaur. That became the show's #1 threat, the Nowhere King. The show Centaurworld is telling Horse's story in the present time. The Elktaur's past is revealed during the final few episodes, what makes this particular aspect all the harder to notice, because we as the audience watch a completely character-developed Horse watching the Elktaurs/Elks/Nowhere King's entire character arc. But if we get rid of this imbalance by aligning the events of the show with the Elktaur's past, it becomes apparent that Elktaur's and Horse's lives tell the same story with different endings. Both of them are animals that were originally a normal specimen, a usual horse and an average centaur, that unintentionally ended up becoming unusual specimens, namely a conscious talking horse and elk. Their entire lives, they have been fixated on a human. First they were separated from said human, and later on their humans are taken by a rival, making it seem like the human does not care about them any longer, resulting in hurt and jealousy. Horse and the Elktaur have both been to Centaurworld, and neither of them felt comfortable there, in Horse's case at least in the beginning. Additionally, the Elktaur visited Earth and did not feel comfortable in the world he did not originate from, just like Horse. Lastly, most importantly, their bodies changed over time in a specific way that represented their personality transformations. Horse turning into a magical being allures to her self-reflection, as she is beginning to like Centaurworld, liking the way she can be herself, and realizing that she really wants to stay with the herd. She is slowly integrating into that world. In contrast, the elk no longer has a place to call home, nowhere he belongs, hence turns into a beast that does not share similarities with any living being from any world. Despite their stories being so similar, what awaited the two of them in the end differs extremely. Doom for the Elktaur, bliss for Horse. Elktaur went down the bad route, because instead of developing and augmenting his existing personality, he abandoned his original self in order to become something he wasn't and was never meant to be. Being obsessed with the idea that he needed to fit into the human world, he blames many things for his miserable state of mind. The humans are at fault for discriminating centaurs, the other centaurs for being so silly that the humans don't take them for full, the world itself for birthing him a centaur. Not once did he consider he could have gotten rid of his sorrow by internal means, by changing his view of the world and becoming better than before. Nor did he ever look for his issues' true causes, what would have meant he had discovered the woman did not need him to become a human. He was fixated on changing the way the world works, an external factor, to reach happiness. But happiness comes from within, and is something you must allow yourself to feel, rather than pursuing situations or objects that promise to provide it. Horse, on the other hand, found the right solutions to the same problems. She learned to accept who she is. If there is no place for you to fit in, you must either look for such a place or just create your own. She learns to not be so hard on herself, accepting that she makes mistakes too, instead of blaming the rest of the world for the quandaries she's in. Horse also seeks to solve problems by including everyone who's involved, instead of taking things into her own hands. And most importantly, she allows herself to be the way she is, discovering herself a little more every day and enjoying herself. Even if there was no one else in the universe that accepted you for who you are, there would still be yourself. Well, thanks for sticking around. If you love deep insights like this little old analysis, make sure to like and subscribe in order to get more videos like this one uploaded directly to your feed. Stay safe, don't split your personalities, see you next time.